Hello everyone, my name is Elizabeth Manns and I'd like to welcome you to the April 4th Coalition Show. This is the March 20th, 2023 edition of the show and is week 445 since the closing of the North Adams Regional Hospital. The April 4th Coalition's mission statement is, we are for workers' rights and collective bargaining rights and are against tax breaks for the rich and corporations who ship our jobs overseas. We support all the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but as is our custom, we put the emphasis on Article 23 at the start of the show. Hello, Dick.
Hello. So I'll start. Article 23, number 1. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment. Number 2, everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work.
Number 3, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself or herself and his or her family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented if necessary by other means of social protection. And number 4, everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for protection of her or his interests. We also at this time give a thank you and a shout out to the program director of WMNBLP 107.1, which I believe is still Michael Putnam, for airing the audio portion of our show on Fridays at 6 p.m., and to the wonderful staff, Dave Fabiano, and I can never remember the
Nicole and Joanne.
And Joanne for helping us produce the show every week. So my apologies to Nicole and Joanne. I'm going to write it down so I don't forget in the future.
It's okay.
Anyway, for helping us produce. Dick, it's March 20th. Would have thought last week that today's the beginning of spring with that wonderful snowstorm, but today, it's a beautiful day, sunshine, harbinger of what's to come for spring and stuff. You know, and I know there's other things we're going to talk about later on the show about March 20th that it's an anniversary of, but you wanted to put the emphasis on Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, on
today.
The financial issues, that especially like we talk about that we were against tax breaks for the rich and corporations that ship our jobs overseas.
Yep.
And we want, you know, we have the right to employment, full employment, the people have the right to be defended against unemployment.
Yep.
And so she's going to talk about some economic issues. We had her speaking last week, and now there's 3 exchanges that she has with in a public hearing in the Senate where she's chairing. The first exchange is on the federal debt limit in the economic repercussions of that. And then the second exchange continues on with that hearing on the debt limit, and the third one continues on the exchange, but it also has someone from Western Massachusetts that's giving testimony. But she has other experts here. So why don't we get right into it?
Okay.
I think they speak for themselves. And
so I want to see if we can look at another aspect of this. The House Republicans have decided to use the debt ceiling to hold our government and our economy hostage. They are demanding massive cuts in government spending, investments in the American economy, investments in American workers, or they won't allow the United States to pay the debts that it has already incurred. You know, a little like running up a bill on the credit card and then declaring that your new budget plan is we're not going to pay the bill on the credit card. So you have all said uniformly, that's a terrible idea. We cannot default on our debt. But the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans in the House, have put us in this between a rock and a hard place. They said, okay, we will raise the debt ceiling, but only if you will agree to massive spending cuts. And it seems that the point of these massive spending cuts is acute pain. And don't take my word for it. Take Donald Trump's, who blamed Republicans' poor showing in the midterms on Americans not feeling, quote, the full gravity of the pain our nation is going through, but expressed confidence that by 2024, it will be, quote, much worse. So let's talk about what it would mean if those Republican cuts went through. Dr. Zandi, you're the chief economist at Moody's. I know you're testifying on your own behalf here, but you're the chief economist at Moody's and one of the authors of a new report that analyzes the impact on the economy from massive spending cuts being demanded by Republicans. So we've talked about what happens if there's breach. Now we're talking about these massive spending cuts. So let's start out. Tell us a little bit about the kinds of cuts we're talking about here.
Well, as you say, they're massive. First, I should say this is a bit opaque because it's not like the House Republicans have put forward a very explicit plan. We're kind of piecing this together and listening to what's being said in the House. And my sense is that they're proposing to so-called balance the budget 10 years from now through spending cuts. Taxes are off the table. And of course, Social Security and Medicare are also off the table. But if you do the arithmetic, and here I'm just doing simple arithmetic, it's $16 trillion in cumulative cuts over the 10-year period.
Okay.
So just divide by 10, that's 1.6 trillion per annum. That's 6% of GDP. That gives you a sense of context.
Okay, so $16 trillion over 10.
Oh, can I say, Senator, just a point of interest? I mean, maybe only economists would appreciate this, but that's a static estimate, right? That doesn't account for the economic consequences of those cuts on the economy and what that means for revenue spending. And so it's not going to be 16 trillion. It's going to be a much bigger number than 16 trillion. But let's just say 16
Okay,
trillion.
so those are in the straight cuts, just doing plain arithmetic on what the Republicans have said, without accounting for how much GDP goes down cumulatively in the middle of that. And just so everybody understands on this, is that the type of cut that the government could achieve by just not filling new job openings and doing a little belt tightening?
No. There's a number of ways you could get there, but the most, I guess, I hate to use the word reasonable way to get there would be you would have to effectively eliminate all non-defense discretionary spending, all the things that you were just mentioning earlier, housing, food inspection, everything related to transportation. You can see all the problems we're having in the airline, among the airlines and the rail that would be affected, housing, healthcare, NASA, everything, aid to overseas, it's just a long list of things. But also Medicaid. The Medicaid program would also have to be effectively eliminated to achieve that $16 trillion in cut over a 10-year period. So this is not some jobs. This is, a lot of what I think American people expect from the American government. These are services that have been provided since the beginning of time, and they rely on them.
Okay. So when you take all that into account, that is, the size of the cuts and the programs you'd have to cut to achieve a reduction in spending of that size, you've done an analysis of the impact on the economy. Can you tell us what that would do to the economy over the next decade?
Sure, and of course I'm making a lot of assumptions about timing and how this would be implemented and what exactly would be cut. But in the scenario that I articulate in gory detail in the paper that was released today, it would result in in the near term, in a very severe recession. It'd be throughout 2024, so it'd be more than a year long. Just for context, the typical recession since World War II is 10 months, so this would be longer than that. The economy would lose 2.6 million jobs. The unemployment rate would rise to as high as 6%. So it would be it's not the financial crisis, but it would be a very meaningful hit to the economy in the near term. It would be a significant recession.
Okay, so in the near term, we're talking about a severe recession, and we're talking about loss of jobs?
2.6 million.
2.6
at the peak of the job loss.
At the peak
of the
would
job
be
loss.
what it looks like overall. And anything about what happens to GDP over this 10-year period?
Well, that was just the near term. So
Yes.
these are cuts through a 10-year period.
Right.
So let's take it out 10 years from now, the end of the budget horizon in 2023. The GDP, that's the value of all the things that we produce, all the goods and services we produce, would be 2.8% less than it would have been if we just did a clean debt limit increase and there would be no impact on the economy. So that's the counterfactual. And just for to get a little bit of context, sorry, I think you said that in your opening remarks, but just to strike that
Which
point
I'd
home.
gotten from your report.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
That's why they sound.
I thought you did. I thought you did the arithmetic yourself. But that's a little more than a kind of a typical year of GDP growth. It's as if the economy could have stood still. Of those 10 years, one of those years it just stood still. So, quite significant. And employment would still be roughly a million, not quite a million, less than it would have been in the counterfactual with a clean debt limit increase.
Okay, so let me just push this on through. So we're talking about 2.6 million jobs lost in the near term, 1 million over time. 10 years out, we'd be down 1 million jobs.
It's just taking two different points in time. At
Right.
the maximal impact in the near term, it's 2.6 million. By the end of the 10-year horizon, I think you're down 950K, something like that. But close to 1 million.
So when you take all that into account, I think I've got my thing here. What we're looking at is the Republicans these House Republicans can either throw us into an immediate recession and cost us about 1 million jobs in the short term if they do a debt default. But if instead we cave in and go with the kinds of cuts they're talking about, we get a severe recession, we get about 2.5 million jobs lost in the near term, and 1 million jobs kind of over time, year by year, off into the future. So this sounds like they've really got us caught where the Republicans are trying to drive this. On the one hand, we don't want to see a debt default, but on the other, I think what you're telling us is the consequences of the kinds of cuts that the Republicans are advancing would also have a severe impact on the economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward that, defaulting on the debt, as we all have discussed, is cataclysmic, depending on just how cataclysmic depends on exactly what scenario unfolds. But the alternative of engaging in these massive cuts in spending over this 10-year horizon would also be, quite devastating, to the economy. There's neither is I think a viable option.
Good. I appreciate that. And I think that takes us back to where we started with all 5 of you, and that is we need to raise the debt ceiling without conditions. Thank you. Bear with me just a little because I want to go back and see if we can dig a little deeper on this question around childcare. So our earlier discussion talked about how these extremist House Republicans are demanding massive across-the-board spending cuts. And if defense is off the board, veterans are off the board, Social Security is off the board, and Medicare is off the board, as some Republicans now claim, then the other programs at a minimum, I'm kind of like you are here, Dr. Zandi, it's just math. You've got to cut the other programs by about 78%, or else just wipe out entire programs. And as the new Moody's analysis shows, if Republicans get their way, this is going to be about 2.6 million Americans who lose their jobs. So I want to just do the translation about the different ways that people lose their jobs under this, using childcare and early childhood education as part of our example. So I'm a big fan of early childhood education. It expands learning opportunities for our babies. It gives mamas and daddies an opportunity to go to work. The United States has been underinvesting in childcare for decades. Of the 37 richest nations in the world, the United States is number 35 in terms of our spending on little ones. And we need to be investing a lot more in childcare to grow our economy. But these MAGA House Republicans are threatening to cut the little bit of funding that we do have going into childcare. So, Ms. Weissenfreud, you run this Head Start Center and early learning program in Franklin, Massachusetts, and Western Hampton counties in Massachusetts. How many employees do you have, and how many children do you serve?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. So when fully staffed, we employ 168 people, and we're funded to serve 438 children. 120 of those are pregnant women, infants, and toddlers, and 318 preschoolers. Because of these chronic structural economic issues we've been talking about, and the pandemic has certainly worsened this, our program, like many others, is struggling to recruit staff.
All right. So just so everyone understands, not everyone knows about Hampton counties and Franklin and this area. Can you just describe the area a little bit? Are you in an urban area?
Yeah, so no, I run a pretty large program, mostly rural, some semi-rural. We span 1,600 square miles.
Okay, so you are the childcare provider for 1,600 square mile
We're a
area.
big one, from the
You're the-
border of Vermont down to the border of Connecticut.
You're the big one. All right, so it sounds like things are already pretty tough on your current budget.
That's right.
Head Start is a federal program that provides funding to help low-income families afford childcare. Is it fair to say that this federal funding is a large part of your budget?
Oh, yes, it's about 85% of our
Okay,
budget.
so 85%. I want you to imagine if your federal funding is cut by 78%, can you keep your centers open and retain your current employees?
I hope I never have to do that math.
Uh-huh. But if you do,
Well, it'll be a huge impact to our operations. As I said, we have 168 employees. We operate 11 sites, 28 classrooms over this rural area. So a 78% cut, we would be serving fewer than 100 children, and we would probably have to reduce to 1 or 2 centers. I would have to lay off about 130 staff, I would say.
all right. So there's the example of what happens if we make these federal cuts. The childcare sector is already short about 60,000 employees compared just to pre-pandemic, when we were already hearing from parents all across this country that they could not find safe, affordable, accessible childcare. And if all of the childcare providers face the kinds of cuts that these MAGA Republicans are proposing, then more childcare workers all across the country will lose their jobs and more of these childcare centers will close. So let me do another part of this. If you cut the number of employees that you have by 130, what's going to happen to the children you serve? Can you estimate how many families would lose their childcare because of those cuts?
Well, again, just doing the arithmetic here, so about 341 of the most vulnerable children and their families would lose care, and that would have both short-term and longer-term impacts, right? So in the short term, if we cut 130 staff, these youngest children would lose access to quality early education and care, to nutritious meals and snacks, screenings, referrals, health and mental health supports, all the things I spoke about earlier, and lose their critical relationships with teachers. We know that Head Start is a fantastic long-term investment in terms of child welfare, as well as high school and college graduation, and of course, participation in the workforce.
So I'm just trying to think through what this means in terms of job losses. So we cut the federal budget the way the Republicans have proposed. You lay off 168 of your staff. In turn, that means that more than half the children you serve, the doors are locked. They can't come. And what happens to their parents?
Well, over 70% of our families work. They go to school or attend school readiness programs. So clearly, if they were to lose childcare, most of those families would lose jobs, would lose income, would have to leave school, would have to leave job readiness programs to take care of their children, with single adult households being most affected. So this would lead to immediate loss of income and thrust them into even deeper poverty.
So the job cuts lead to more job cuts in your case. Are there other childcare options near you?
So we're the largest provider of subsidized care in the rural part of our service area. There are a few providers in Western Mass, but we also have the most expensive market for private pay. It'll cost about $21,000 a year for infant care, and most of our families do live at the federal poverty level. So there's no way that the 341 children who would lose services could be absorbed by other providers in the area.
So let me just say, Thank you, Ms. Weissenfreud, for the work you do. Thank you for the way that you play a critical role in keeping our economy going and letting families build a strong economic future.
And may I say one thing? Thank
please.
you for calling the children little people. Because they are people.
Yes, they are.
Thank you.
Yes, they are. They don't have lobbyists, but they are people.
That's right.
That's an important distinction around
I
here.
appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. But thank you very much for your work, and thank you for helping illustrate what happens here. If we can, then, I'd like to turn to one more topic. I'm going to call on myself again since Senator Kennedy hasn't made it back from voting, and that is to talk about revenues. I think it's fair to ask, and I think Dr. Holtz can raise this, how the national debt got so large. MAGA Republicans claim it's about spending too much on child care and air traffic controllers, but there are two sides to any balance sheet, and MAGA Republicans have conveniently ignored their own actions in driving up the national debt by shoveling tax breaks to the richest Americans and the largest corporations. Year after year, the Republican playbook has been simple: more help for their rich buddies and more economic pain for everyone else. Today, billionaires pay just 3% of their wealth each year in federal income taxes, less than half the rate that 99% of America pays. Giant corporations have lobbied their way from paying 6% of the cost of running our country to paying about 1% of the cost of running our country. So serious conversations about reducing the national debt should start with rebalancing our tax system, not start with how to hurt families. So I want to talk about some of those ideas. First, repealing the Trump tax cuts for the wealthy and for giant corporations. Ms. Matsui, you're a tax expert. That's why we invited you here today. So how much would it affect the deficit if we repealed the Trump tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and the largest corporations?
Thank you, Senator. Just to discuss two provisions that were in President Biden's budget last year to even partially repeal or bring down the, raise the corporate tax rate, as well as repeal the tax cut for the highest individual income tax rate, would raise $1.3 trillion over 10 years and almost $187 billion over 10 years, respectively, and those revenues could be used to reduce the deficit.
Okay, and this is for the largest corporations and the wealthiest individuals,
The
right?
highest individual.
Okay, and Ms. Weissenfreud, you're going to help me out here on the other half of this. You run an early learning and child care program. Would it increase your taxes if we reverse the Trump tax cuts for people making over $500,000 in a single year?
Oh, no.
Would it increase the taxes of your workers?
No again.
Would it increase the taxes of the families that you serve?
Definitely not.
Okay, so nobody in your outfit's making more than $500,000 a year?
No, Senator.
Okay. Dr. Zandi, as an economist, how do you think about repealing the Trump tax cuts for people earning over, say, $500,000? How would that affect the U.S. economy? Would it cost us 2.6 million jobs the way the House Republican cuts would?
No, I think the negative consequences would be on the margin. And I base that on looking at the effects of the tax cuts. I mean, the cuts were put forward as a way to significantly increase economic activity. And I think the research that's been done since that time has found that indeed it has not done that. Admittedly, we need more data points, and the pandemic has made it difficult to disentangle all the things that are going on. But research from the IMF, research from Brookings has shown that the benefit of the tax cuts are relatively small. Therefore, I think the negative impact of the tax increases will be on the margin relatively small. The final thing I'll say is when we were all debating and discussing the TCJA cuts and CBO weighed in, you can go back and look at those studies. They found that based on all the research that they were doing, that the the benefits of those tax cuts would be on the margin, and it looks like that's exactly what we got
That's right.
on the
On
margin.
the margin, meaning very small.
Very, very small. I mean, all else being equal, if you raise taxes, it's going to have some negative consequence, but it's on the margin. It's on the margin.
Okay, which means you could raise them here, not going to have a big effect.
No,
on this.
no,
Okay.
not a big effect.
All right, so there's one option that we're talking about, $1 trillion is roll back the Trump tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. Here's another. Tax the profits that giant multinational corporations hide overseas right now, helping level the playing field for domestic businesses and joining Europe and others in enacting a global corporate minimum tax. Ms. Matsui, how much revenue would that raise?
Senator, for example, Senator Sanders' Corporate Tax Dodging Protection Act would raise an estimated $1 trillion over 10 years.
Okay, so there's a second $1 trillion that we've got. Ms. Weissenfreud, are you or any of your workers or any of the families whose children you care for giant multinationals who would pay this additional tax on international profits?
No, Senator Warren.
Okay. And Dr. Zandi, would this have a meaningful effect on the U.S. economy?
No, I think it'd have a very small marginal impact on the economy.
Okay, so there's a second option, an international corporate minimum that would shut down tax havens. Let's do a third one. We should ask billionaires to pay taxes on their growing piles of wealth through proposals like my ultra millionaire tax or President Biden's billionaire minimum income tax. Ms. Matsui, how much money would that raise?
President Biden's proposal would raise about $361 billion over 10 years, and your ultramillionaire's tax is estimated to raise up to $3 trillion over 10 years.
Okay, so somewhere in that range, between $360 billion and $3 trillion. Ms. Weissenfreud, just checking, you, your employees, your families, are any of you secret billionaires who would pay this tax, either President Biden's tax or my 2-cent wealth tax?
No, we're not.
Okay, and Dr. Zandi, one more time,
Yep, on the margin.
on the margin.
Yep.
Okay, so I just want to say thank you to all of you on this. There are just 3 proposals, and we could raise somewhere around $5 trillion without costing the economy 2.6 million jobs and without increasing the burden on workers and families by a single penny. And we could make the tax system a whole lot fairer as part of what we're doing here. House Republicans want to talk about the national debt, and I am happy to talk about the national debt, but let's be clear. This is a question of who pays for running our government. Responsible lawmakers should flat out refuse to cut a single dollar of investments for the 99% of Americans, while the top 1% are getting away without paying their fair share. And if Republicans really care about the national debt, I'd be to make sure that billionaires and giant corporations are pitching in just like everyone else.
All valuable information, and the thing we wanted to, and we will see you next week because we're, so
But
we
maybe
should.
we'll run over a little bit. I think Dave said we could run over just a little bit in time.
All right, go ahead.
I just want to say, I feel that Elizabeth Warren is representing us in Washington, just listening to those statements.
Right.
That
She
she's
is.
fighting for those people that we are advocating for.
Right, she's fighting for
And
the
I- and I-
99% this
Yeah,
time.
I
That's-
appreciate that.
Yep,
We talked about today's an anniversary. It's the first day of spring,
Right.
but it's also the anniversary of the
end of the Iraq War.
end of the Iraq War.
Actually, the start of the Iraq War.
The start of the Iraq War, right. And I
Right.
just wanted, I've heard a lot of news reports today, and I just wanted to make it clear from my perspective, there was a overwhelming majority or a large group of the American population that did not want to see us enter that war. It was
Correct.
not like we were in support of it. There might have been bipartisan support for the war, but there wasn't the population around the world. People were marching all over. We were out in front of City Hall. There were people all over. We were against that war.
No, we
it
were-
wasn't something that was supported by the great population.
That wasn't a people's war, that was a politician's war.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So,
And the other thing is too, tomorrow is March 21st, and it will, beginning of early voting in Wisconsin will start for a state Supreme Court
Position.
judge position. There is one woman running and a man running, and the woman is on the progressive side. The man that's running is on the conservative side. It's a really big election, and you know, we started 12 years ago the April 4th
Protesting that.
the April 4th coalition. We started protesting what Governor Scott Walker, who was elected in 2010, started to impose, taking away collective bargaining rights for public employees and turning back the clock on labor laws. And we,
And
that's
he had the
how our
backing of a
organization,
court. And he
yeah,
had the backing of
he
the
had the
Supreme
supporting
Court.
of the Supreme Court, but we organized here locally. That's how we became the April 4th coalition. And on that anniversary date, 12 years to the day where we had a nationwide support
Rallies.
demonstration to support the workers in Wisconsin, that is the final day of the election, April 4th. So, and the tide could turn the other way if she is elected. Now, Kelly has already lost one election. He's the man, the conservative. And Justice Janet, I can't remember her last name, it's really long, but she supporting, you know, she's a progressive wing. If she wins, the Supreme Court in Wisconsin changes. And in that change is very vital, because the gerrymandering that occurs in Wisconsin
Could end.
could end, and that way there'll be Democratic representation in the legislatures. Right now, it's gerrymandered so the Democrats cannot win. They're not representing, the number of representatives do not reflect the number of Democratic votes that were cast in that election. And also, Wisconsin was the state that came closest to voting to overturn the election. You know, so
Correct.
this is a very important election coming up, and I just wanted to cover that. But, you know,
Okay.
we just want to say power to the people, and thank you, Elizabeth Warren.
Yep.
There's power in the factory, power in the land, power in the hand of the worker. But it all amounts to nothing if together we don't stand. There is power in our union. Now the lessons of the past are all learned with workers' blood. Mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities and the farmlands to trenches.